Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, San Francisco's premier author interview program. And today we are going to welcome a man who was once a member of one of the most important groups in this city's population. This man was a cab driver. His name is Larry Sager, and he's written a book about doing cabbing called No Guns, No Knives, No Personal Checks, with a subtitle, The Tales of a San Francisco Cab Driver, and it's published by Everett Madison Publishing. So that's who you are. You're no longer a cab driver, but at one time you were a member of the most important group in the city of San Francisco.
Yes, Jim, thank you. And I'm sure the cab drivers in the city will appreciate that that description of their work and their job.
Well, the other thing that I want to delve into, just because it's phrased a little differently, nowhere on this beautiful jacket does it say that this is a novel. But on the title page, quote, "This book is presented as a work of fiction." Why are we so secretive here?
Well, I like to call it a true fictionalized account. The metamorphosis of the book, as you have it, went through various stages, actually. I was driving a cab at night while I was going to school in the day, and I was majoring in creative writing, actually. So what started happening in the cab worked out well as far as some inspiration and material to write my papers that were due in my creative writing classes on a very regular basis. And in talking actually with other cab drivers I knew, I found out that for some reason some of the things that were happening to me were not necessarily the run-of-the-mill things that happen to other cab drivers, although I think if you take any kind of a poll, most cab drivers are writing a book and are at some.
I think you're right. I think one of the reasons, perhaps, that a lot of things happening to you were not happening to other cab drivers was you I think, are one of the most open-minded cab drivers I've ever heard about. I mean, you seem to be comfortable in the city, and every time you talk about, well, this neighborhood really isn't terrific, then there's a qualifier there, but it has a good place to get burritos or something like that. So what I think comes through here is a great love of San Francisco.
Well, I appreciate that, and I do love the city very much, actually, and have always loved it. And I think the book partially presents the juxtaposition, if you will, of what's one of the most beautiful cities in the world, I think, but what's also actually one of the most dangerous jobs a person can have. I wasn't necessarily up on the statistics when I was driving a cab, but it is you are 60 times more likely to become a victim of a homicide driving a cab than in any other occupation in the United States.
Oh my gosh. Ooh. And how long did you live this perilous life?
I did it for about 2.5 years. I drove, like I said, the night shift. I'd get on about 3:30, 4:30, and would drive until 1:30, sometimes 3 or 3:30 in the morning. You try to get out a little earlier, especially on those weeknights, and on the weekends, on a Friday or Saturday night. You prefer to get out at 3 so you can get in before the bars close, and you have to deal with the folks coming out of the bars.
Coming out of the bars, yeah. There is a statement you make that says, quote, "Statistics indicate," and you were just referring to it, "the highest number of workplace homicide victims are cab drivers," which leads to my next question. So why the heck did you do this?
Well, frankly, I had a girlfriend at the time, and
she needed diamonds.
Staying around her at night was not necessarily more dangerous than the cab driving. I'm sorry to say. I think you are in a little bit of denial, actually, when you're driving. And, of course, now that I don't drive, I do have occasion to take a cab. And the proximity of the driver to the passenger in the back is really frighteningly close. And I think I think when I was driving, I think there was probably some kind of a psychological barrier I had, pretending that the person in the back seat was not really 2 feet behind you.
That's interesting that you say that, because I got that sense in your writing that you were up front and they were way back there.
Right.
And way back there ain't so way back.
Right. And also, cab company guidelines, it seemed at the time I was driving, called for people to sit in the back and not to get into the front, because supposedly someone sitting in the front is going to be more dangerous. And actually, I had a majority of people pulling out knives and guns who were in the front, but really, if you consider it, I think someone in the back poses a much greater threat to you, because they can get you from behind.
Yeah. When you're not looking, at least you're not supposed to be looking back there. And you're supposed to be looking at the road.
And the rearview mirrors are very tiny, actually. Yeah. A lot of times you want to have them a little larger, and sometimes you're glad they're as small as they are, actually.
No guns, no knives, no personal checks introduces the reader to a vast array of characters. None more important than a guy named David. Why? We'll find out when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
Larry Sager is the author. No guns, no knives, no personal checks. The Tales of a San Francisco Cab Driver. That's the book. And the book, Larry, is published by a company that I've not heard of before, called Everett Madison Publishing, located in this neck of the woods?
In San Francisco. The book is available at all local bookstores. In fact, Amazon just had a special that they were running where you can get a Tony Bennett CD along with this book for a special price. I'm not pushing Amazon. I just get a kick out of being.
But I mean,
Tony.
how lucky and fortunate for Tony.
Oh, absolutely.
To have that. I mean, come on. That guy, he doesn't sell all that well, and to be twinned with a book like this, my God, that's going to... Is it a special Christmas record?
Well, I'm trying to get him a little more exposure in the city of San Francisco, and I'm just trying to do my part. But if the books don't have it in stock, you can order them. I'll be actually also at Book Passage on February 22nd, signing books. They'll have books there. They've got books all over town here.
Great. Okay, that's good. I'm glad to get that out. So this fellow David that I want to talk about is a dispatcher.
Sure.
And he might just as well be God. Here's the way you describe him.
Right.
With him, David, it's thank you no matter what. If you get something good, a nice cab, early departure from the yard, thank you. And you shut up. It's as if he doesn't want anyone else to know that he did you a favor. If you get a piece of crap to drive for the night, thank you. Or you'll get something much worse the next time. He will remember any complaint, disruption, or speed bump in his afternoon, whether you appear at his window the next day or 3 weeks later. He's one of those guys who seems like he's not really paying attention, but not a detail escapes his notice. And again, you will suffer if you raise his ire. What a nice guy.
Well, he
is God.
Everyone who's got to work for a living, I think, probably has to deal with someone like that or worse at some point in their working day. And actually, David is modeled after an actual dispatcher whose name was David, coincidentally.
Now, the other thing is that David works 5 days a week, okay, regardless. And with 200 or 300 cabs going out every night, you don't stand there and ogle, but I notice many drivers tip him $5. Do the math. $1,000 per night? A little more, a little less? An impressive amount of cash for sitting in a booth telling guys to shut up and sit down. Perhaps he performs really difficult paperwork. And you then go on to say, either in that same paragraph or a little later, that you've often thought about it but didn't know how long the line would be for his kind of job.
Right. There's a lot of
that's a lot of tax-free money we're talking about here.
Well, there's a lot of cash that changes hands in the cab business, and tax-free or not tax-free, I don't know anything about that.
No, of course not.
Believe me. And it's just some interesting numbers that you run when you take a look at the number of cabs that sit out in a lot and the amount of money that is changing hands occasionally.
And it's kind of math even I can do. It's called multiplication. I can handle this. Now, one of the ongoing problems, it seems to me, that you bring up with some frequency in this book is food. Okay?
Right.
Finding the time and the place to eat it. Now, I do want you to know, and perhaps you already know this, being an author, that the place that you, quote, recommend, unquote, to get a quality burrito at a good price is also the favorite of Calvin Trillin. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that
Absolutely.
at all.
When he comes to town, that's where we have to go for burritos. La Cumbra on 14th, 16th in Valencia.
Right, it's on Valencia between 16th and 17th.
Now, the problem is, in this book, Larry, who's a fellow who sounds like the author, gets his burrito.
And a parking place.
And a parking place. And he doesn't know where the heck to go to eat it. You wind up at a telephone stand or something like that. This is not nice. The only other food that I remember you talking about is the McDonald's, which you had to throw under the seat.
Right. As described in the book, the smelling up of the cab with food items is supposed to be left to the sole domain of the passengers, but occasionally the cab driver will cross that line and bring some food into the cab.
I don't know. You are... it's not an easy job, this cab driving.
Well, I think most people are trained that you don't pick up strangers, first of all, and you don't talk to strangers, and certainly being given a bright yellow cab and some money in your pocket shouldn't be an excuse to all of a sudden start going around stopping and picking up people just because they raise their hands up.
Okay, no guns, no knives, no personal checks. Tell some strange tales. None stranger, in my opinion, than the story of the man who gave away his cell phone. We'll look at that tale when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
This is Jim Foster. It is Conversations on the Coast. The title of our tome today is No Guns, No Knives, No Personal Checks. I love this title. I really do. And it goes so well with the subtitle, The Tales of a San Francisco Cab Driver. The author with us, Larry Sager. It's published by Everett Madison Publishing. Be not afraid. It's available at all the best bookstores in the Bay Area, including Book Passage, and you can even get it at those wholesalers in the Northwest. One of the stories in the book that I couldn't shake from my mind was about a man that you pick up, and there begins a story about his cell phone. Who's going to use it and who's going to wind up with it?
Right. Well, that's Bob. He's, I think, one of the more colorful characters in the book. And actually, there's also 12 illustrations in the book, and you can see a rendering of Bob with two of his girlfriends that he picks up during the cab ride, sitting in the back seat having a good time. This is a guy who starts out actually from his girlfriend's house, from where he's doing some renovations and paying for them. And he and the girlfriend have had a fight. He directs the cab driver to an address in the Avenues, and he picks up some white powder of some kind. They go
white powder.
They go out to a favorite liquor store of his on Van Ness after the Avenues stop, and then they proceed sort of spontaneously, according to Bob's train of thought that he expresses, at least to the cab driver. He picks up a couple of ladies, and he's got his cell phone with him, and he insists that these young ladies dial their moms.
What a nice guy. What a nice guy.
While they're en route back to his apartment, which is a separate apartment from his girlfriend's house. So,
of course, I would think.
And, of course, if Bob reads the book, he might recognize himself in here. I don't know.
But did he not invite the cab driver to call his mom? Or did I misread?
Yeah, well, he's getting free phone calls, and being the generous person that he is, he's having the cab driver make long-distance calls. He's got the young ladies making long-distance calls, trying to, stick it to the man, I guess is what he's trying to do there.
There you are. My favorite story. That's, entrepreneurship at its finest and toniest. I really like it. You give certain advice toward the end of the book about safety and survival directions. You or the author feel, for example, the first thing you must do is utilize stereotype profiling.
Well, I don't know if I go that far as to say that. One of the first things you want to make sure, if there's any way to do that, is that the passenger is not going to kill you or rape you or stab you. And the next thing for me when I was driving was that you want to determine whether or not they can afford to pay the fare to where they're going. It's hard to... I guess be a psychopath if you don't look kind of normal. So especially I think in San Francisco, probably some of your safer fares are the folks who maybe in another city you're not going to stop for. I mean, if they have 5, face piercings and their hair is different lengths and say red and green, probably there can be a safe bet to pick up. You always want to check whether someone has enough money to pay the fare, of course, regardless. And,
well, this kind of leads into one of your other pieces of advice, I think. Go with your gut.
Yes.
In other words, if the guy looks weird in San Francisco, he could be the safest person on the face of God's earth. But you still have that paramount question to ask. Do they have the money?
True. And it can be hard, too. You can let somebody in and you scope them out for a 20 or 30 second period and decide that they're bad news. And to try to get somebody out of the cab once they've gotten into the cab is probably going to lead to problems no matter what their intentions were, because nobody wants to sit down in a cab, especially after maybe 3 have undescribably gone by without stopping for some reason. And, they don't want to give up their seat now that they finally got one. And here's the cab driver saying, I have a bad feeling about you. You have to get out.
Success in the cab business, you say, is measured by making it through the night safely and with a few bucks in your pocket. People don't get rich doing this.
Well, I think I made a reference actually to the first night I drove, and after a 10-hour shift, I think I netted out about $12.
Good Lord.
There are certain tricks to the trade, I guess. There are certain feelings that you get about what's a busy part of the neighborhood, what's not a busy part of the neighborhood, where to go to get the fares. There's playing the computer if you have a computer in your cab. You're not necessarily going to get rich. If you can get that job as a dispatcher, that's a good job to have.
Well, now you know many, if not most, of the tricks of the trade driving a cab in San Francisco. And if you want to get them all, go buy No Guns, No Knives, No Personal Checks, The Tales of a San Francisco Cab Driver, Larry Sager. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Thank you, Jim.
Follow us on Twitter at Jim Foster COC, or send an email to jimfostercoc@gmail.com.